Good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 Educators Conference presented by Buckeye Book Fair and Tri-County Educational Service Center. My name is Andrew Johnson and I'll be your host for today's session. First off, I want to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. I know you all have very busy schedules, so it means a lot that you're here today. But before we begin, I want to encourage you to utilize the chat features and Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll try to hold questions until the end of each author presentation, and at that time, we'll field them. But if there are some timely questions that show up during the presentation, we will make sure to field them at that time and get them answered. Today's session is going to last approximately an hour, and at the end of the session, I will provide everybody with a link and a QR code to follow to complete a short survey in order to earn a certificate for professional development contact hours that you can use for your licensure renewal. Today, I am happy to introduce our featured presenter, Mr. Will Hillenbrand.
Thank you, Andrew. And did you have anything to say with the slide being up? I just popped in.
Oh no, you're fine. You're totally fine. I assume you're probably going to talk a little bit about your background anyways, so I will say, though, that Will's going to be focusing today on the revision process and shaping ideas using pictures in books, or using picture books, I apologize. So I will turn it over to you, sir.
Okay, Andrew, and I'm going to be joined by a lot of my colleagues later on. But to begin with, I'd like to, I'll continue here, and I'm going to share my screen and bring you into my presentation. I'm going to give you an outline first to let you know that it's going to be broken into two parts. And the first part will be a pre-recorded piece. It's going to be tightly packed with a lot of content. And then I'm going to do a keynote presentation to reinforce those points and give you a direct connection from the kind of abstract but practical parts of the first part of the program to the second part, which actually shows the direct examples in my portfolio. The narrator for the first part of the program will be me, but it will be my thumbprint self-portrait. I'm going to turn that on now. Well, you'll see two. You'll see that plus my screen. So let's begin. Hi, this is Will Hillenbrand, and welcome to my session for the Buckeye Book Fair 2020, How to Revise and Shape Ideas. This session will roughly be broken into two parts. The first part, a very practical part, will be presented and talked about with Mighty Reader. Actually, I think Mighty Reader will be our guide and co-host to that part. I'll follow that up with my book, Snow Friends, which will talk about things in more specific detail taken from the very first part of this program. I'm so happy we have an opportunity here to talk about something that I feel not only is essential, but possibly the most important part of the creative process. As we know from many of us, revising might sound like, oh, not again. I have to do it again, not again. Why didn't I get it right the very first time? So I'm going to talk about revising first, because actually it's in the revision, and then the revision, or the working and reworking, or the writing and the rewriting, that our idea becomes clear. In other words, that's when the idea takes shape. I'd like to start with this. I'd like to start with the idea. What is a good idea? How do we choose an idea? And if we don't have an idea of what we're doing, nothing can take shape. Let's pretend if you were my class and I walked in today and I said, class, we're going to have fun today. Today, we're going to make a book. More specifically, you are going to make a book. At some time after that opening remark, you will need to square up and think about, what am I going to do? What will my classmates do? What will the other authors and illustrators in my class do? And how will I measure up? You might even think, how do we measure our own good idea? Will it be good enough? Will it be original enough? Will it be funny enough to entertain and engage my reader? If I choose to tell a story about my own experience, is that good enough? Am I a superhero? Have I been a hero in any way, shape, or form in the world, in my life? Of course, the answer to that is yes. You are the hero of your own unique story, and no one has seen the world the way you have. How do you allow others to see that? Well, that's part of the writer and illustrator's story. Our stories are often a blend of ourself, our observations, and our experiences. Writers have always worked well from these sources because they know them, and they know them with intimacy, because they've lived them. Charles Dickens often said there was nobody in the room that was a better observer than him. And he not only looked at people, but he listened how they said, what they said, and why. My friend Verna Artema said, writers are bookworms that hatch. By reading, we understand and learn how great authors introduce us to the scenes, their composition of how they see the world and how they want us to see the world they're writing or illustrating about. Let's just accept the fact that the idea is a problem. Your story, and for your students, the idea is actually a problem. Mighty Reader says, accept the problem. Every story has a problem in it. I often find that when I've done lots of drawing in my journal, the drawing that I keep coming back to and looking at again and again is the one I'm most interested in. I would suggest keeping a journal if you're an artist or a writer, and the ideas you keep thinking about, well, I think that's the one that's calling you to find out more, and that will be the problem that will be the one for you. One of the pitfalls or myths about writing is, of course, getting from start to finish in one step. A student that's able to do that might be considered the writer or the artist in the room. I'll accept that, but what I'm more concerned about is creating a community experience of many people feeling that they all have a potential, a story, and a way of seeing the world because they have a unique way of experiencing and seeing the world that we all can understand better when they write about it or draw about it. For the time being, I want you to think about the start and finish like a game board. There are many spaces. The first one is start. The last one is finish. Now, if you just draw a direct arrow from start to finish, that is really circumventing the process. And indeed, that can happen on occasion. But mostly what we're talking about is a practical path to having something that you're happy with in the end. So how do you scaffold yourself? How do you build to that end? How do you help those that you love, whether they're your own child or your student, find a path that will guide them to a successful and satisfying conclusion that they can feel has been independently made and is entirely their own? The second place on the game board may be the space where we mine for ideas. I'm going to ask you to visualize something here. If you were mining for gold in 1849, what would you need? You would need to be in California. You would need to have waders. You'd need to have a pan, and you would be going out into a stream to be able to find little flecks of gold. All the really big gold nuggets have already been found. So what's left? The little pieces that are mixed in with everything else. With everything else, the gold is embedded. Now, how do we find it? It's heavy. It'll sink to the bottom. So just like our best ideas that we keep thinking about will end up staying and sticking with us longer than the other moments. We should mine for ideas that have weight to them. And although these ideas may be flakes and may not look like they amount to much, when we collect many of them, it's the collective experience that becomes the most comprehensive and the biggest overall and most meaningful part of what we need to tell. In practical terms, I do this by keeping a journal. I come up with many ideas, I draw them and redraw them, and actually my drawings begin to speak a story. That's when I write down the dialogue, and then I think about the pieces that need to join them in between. But what happens if you get stuck? Well, accept it. Getting stuck is a part of this experience, so it's not unique to something else. It's actually a part of what happens. Usually when I find I'm getting stuck, I'll go back to the experts. And for me, that means rereading or relooking at people who have done it well. And those are the people that I find to be my favorite writers and illustrators. They have also experienced something or some time when they've gotten stuck. And when they've solved it and allow me to see the pleasure of their solving of it, well, it actually inspires me to move on. I would suggest that for all of us. When we get stuck, accept it, and then take a look at others that inspire us that can help us move on. Now I'm going to shift gears for just a moment to give us a thought problem. Imagine you're in a gymnasium and you are a student. Your gym teacher just says, oh, here's a basketball. Now everybody in the class, line up here at midcourt. The game we're playing today is called the buzzer beater. And now everyone here in line gets a chance from midcourt to throw the ball high into the air and see if you can make it into the hoop halfway down the court. Now you're in line. What are you thinking? Is this exciting? Who's going to do it? Who's going to make this shot? Will it be me? At best, we all know we have little experience from midcourt, and we all know if you make this shot, well, I think we all know, that this, indeed, is a lucky shot. Back to the game. A student grabs the ball, fires it high, high, high into the air, and whoosh! It goes through. Everyone cheers. And maybe that person was the only person in the room that made the shot. It's a fun game, but it's not a really practical way to teach how to be able to play basketball or even how to choose who is the best basketball player in the room. If we don't do mining of our ideas, we rely only on one shot, and there are problems with that. The biggest problem is it's a shot taken at the end of the game. It's called a buzzer beater because, well, you either make it or you don't. Everyone cheers or they don't. If you were building a competitive team, wouldn't you teach how to do a layup? Or maybe even try to teach practical ways to have success, how to dribble, how to pass the ball, how to be able to build the score up, how to make sure you're not fouling the opponent. All these things are practical guides to winning the game. And if they're all done well, the chances are, at the end of the game, you have a very large score and a buzzer beater won't beat you. Or you won't need one to be able to win a game that you're behind on. In fact, I don't remember ever seeing a basketball game where there were only buzzer beater shots from beginning to end. Going back in line, nearly every other child probably would think that the person who made the buzzer beater shot would be the star player. The same thing as if someone came up with an idea that got them from start to finish in one move. They may think, well, they're the natural writer, they're the natural artist. In fact, This is the myth of the gifted athlete, or the gifted writer, or the gifted illustrator. It is a myth because it actually is not practicable. A player that makes that shot can put tremendous pressure on themselves when they stand at the line the next time and they don't make it. All of this leads to feelings of failure. Failure for the students that are in line, and eventual failure even for the person who made the buzzer beater shot. If we disqualify ourselves, we will have no energy left to do the hard work of revision and shaping our ideas to become the ideas that really do reflect the person we are. Back to the beginning, if the teacher said to the class, if I'm saying to you, pull out your journal. Today you're going to have an opportunity to write about something you've already thought about. Well, how does that feel? Does that reframe your whole idea of thinking, moving from a blank piece of paper to something that's a solid idea? Well, if you have a journal, you're not working from a blank piece of paper. You're just coming to, finally, now you have a time that you can sit down and write or draw about something you've been thinking about for a long, long time. Here's another thought experiment. You have an idea when you're taking a walk or you're driving down the road. It's a perfect idea. Maybe it was even a dream you had last night. But when you sit down to write it or draw about it, it doesn't seem as clear as it did before. Is that wrong? Is that bad? Is that unusual? It's typical. Unless we've had an amazingly impressive experience, when we go to write about it, it often can seem more vague than we remember. That's why revision is so important. We start with something, a nugget, and we build all the other pieces of gold we've collected around it. But gold's not finished yet. It needs to take a shape. We now have a collection of small pieces. What will it be? What will it become? Will it be a ring? Will it be something else? That's the shape. We should know the shape so that we can bend the raw materials into the shape it needs to take. Whether by heating it or by pounding it, we shape it by pushing and pulling like a piece of clay when you're a sculptor and you're making a shape. As we make it, perhaps, and more than likely, that piece will tell you what it's intended to be. That's why, again, journaling is important because it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue with you and the materials you're working with. Sometimes, as an artist, I need to step away from my work to see it anew. For a writer, and when I'm writing, it's important for me to read the work aloud. Often I do that and record it and come back and listen to it later. That allows me to understand better if I've done my work with clarity. Because, after all, it's always been in my head, but sometimes I don't know that I've actually communicated that. Until I reread, then rewrite, or relook, and then redraw. I think shaping our ideas is a natural extension of revision. It will take its shape based upon how we've made it and how we intend to experience it. This hard work needs a main ingredient, and that is play. You need to relax, and you need to play, and play, and play. Inherent with the gold you've been working with will be a shine, a polish, and a luminance that is rendered from the time you spent revising. None of this happens by magic. It takes a lot of muscle to be able to make your story or your book come to life. In fact, what Henry Green says is, the more you leave out, the more you highlight what you leave in. Good luck with your revising, your rewriting, and shaping your ideas. Anyone could not do it. but you are the hero of your own story, and we're all waiting to find out how that adventure works out for teachers and parents. You're the cheerleaders for those that are writers. However, I would suggest one more thing. Be a writer and a reader yourself. By doing so, you will not only get into the trenches of understanding and being with those who are doing the hard work, but you will also have a shared experience. In doing so, when you talk about what needs to be done or what could be done, you will have better background knowledge and a story to tell. And now I'm going to move into this section, which we'll talk about with the remaining time I have, about 10 minutes, about how my book, Snow Friends, happened. At one point, it was called Dog Walk. Marjorie Kyler, my friend, my very first editor that I met over 30 years ago, here she is with her dog when she was a child. She's the author of this book. And I don't have any dogs now. I saw Lindsay Ward's dog earlier, but I draw lots of dogs and I love them. And the dog of my childhood is in the white Bel Air station wagon between the two photographs above. When I started this story, it was because Marjorie was the writer, but she also was my longtime editor. She sent me these pages. She said, I have an idea for a story, and I've also drawn it. And these are her drawings. Later on, I found this photograph on her website because I couldn't really understand what was going on her page 6. it was a family member with their feet up reading, and I thought that was hilarious to me. But she had these this outline with these stick figures, and when she sent it to me, she was talking about word balloons and action and are you interested? And I loved getting this jump start into a book. She knew and I knew that things were going to change and they would be revised, but you need to put an anchor down to be able to start on your way. And this certainly became a part that allowed us both to think about what could happen and what could happen next. Now, for me, it started with drawing my favorite thing of the book, which was the dog. What kind of dogs would there be in this book? And then I'm thinking about the child. And the drawing of this child was done on my tablet, and I quickly added some color to it because I felt the drawing was begging for it. And then as soon as I finished that, I thought about revising it, which was basically we would call this character development. So I drew this child, and moving on, I created my storyboard. And now instead of showing individual pages, the storyboard shows the beginning and the end of the book all together with all the pages, a little bit like a comic strip. I'm going to focus on the very beginning here because doing a whole book is challenging, and my fellow creators all know that. But the beginning part, maybe the first 7 pages, are critical to engage and hook our reader. And so as I move through that, I have a half title page. One of the main characters, Oscar's looking out of the door window here. And when you see him here, he's in his home looking out on a scene. The door still frames him. And then we reverse that view by going inside the house and looking out. This page, which becomes also the cover later on, was first drawn by the picture that has the white background. You'll see where I started and where it goes to, but in the beginning you can see Matt sitting on his bed and a smaller dog with him and an action going outside his window. My desktop often looks like this, where I do one drawing which seeds another drawing, which seeds another drawing, and another drawing. And probably more than this. This actually cleans it up a little bit. But what I kept looking at were these drawings right here. This thumbnail sketch at the very beginning, the top of the page, was the composition, almost exactly what I drew in the black and white drawing below it. You can see many of the things are the same. I wanted the dog to actually take on a human character where it's very much engaging to what might seem like a passive child. In a way, it is. I was thinking about what Marjorie did when I did this drawing. I thought, should I go back to it? But I was happy with what I had, but I was happy with what she gave me because it inspired me to think about it more. My drawings are done both traditionally and on my tablet. So you can see the drawing is drawn here like this. And as I build and scaffold my work, I always think it's important, and I think Jeffrey, who's going to speak in a little bit, would agree with me. The drawing is the foundation. Maybe Dave would too. Maybe everyone, Lindsay and Michael, everybody. The drawing is the foundational part, and then I'll begin adding the color layers to this picture. The composition doesn't change, but if I take the drawing away, you can see that in many ways, because I can do this, and this drawing is done electronically, the drawing is on a separate layer. When I remove that pencil drawing layer, you can see kind of the abstract marks that make up the underpainting, the drawing that's underneath. And oftentimes in doing artwork, it's this combination of randomness and energy and spontaneity and control, both. Going back to the storyboard, when I take a look at that, we can move on, and I think about the action for the story. And now I'm thinking about how that works with panels, large panels and small panels to tell the story. And all this is about moving the action, not only from point of view, but the speed of the reader and what I want them to look at. That's composition. It's a different kind of composition. We go from frame to frame and content page to next content page. But these are built and, of course, revised again and again because it's the nature of the beast. You see it as you build it. And as you build it, you see it as a whole. What I forgot to tell you was Marjorie had words in the beginning. My first dummy had no words at all. That was sent to our editor, and she decided it would be better to have words. So now when Marjorie wrote her story, she looked at my pictures. And her story is about 4 pages in length. And the next version of this book has the words in it, slightly different than what they were. And now building through one picture here. And I'm just going to let this roll, and it will be the last picture pretty much I'll be talking about. There's about 3 minutes left. But now you can begin to see this drawing is taking shape. I'm using an isometric on it, and as the building of this picture is captured with every mark. And sometimes it's important for us to be able to revisit our work once it's finished, or when we're making it, we kind of get lost in the middle of it. And how did I do what I did? Because you're in that zone of creativity. And this is a nice way to be able to step back and sometimes even look at this picture and see, well, how do I do the next one? Or how did I change what I was doing? This picture is chock-a-block full of revisions. You can see where I'm moving buildings, and you also see I had a plan to begin with. And this kind of revision happens in moving forward to the finish. And that is the ideas that are suggested in the making of that initial sketch, but then you have to do the fulfillment of that sketch, and there's more to decide and more to revise. Like, where's the bunny going to be in this picture? Is the bush here? Is the bush there? All of this is even before I begin to lay the color down. I'm making this, and I want my drawings to be flexible at this point so I can make those choices before I start adding the color. So I'm going to just go ahead and scroll down here and say thank you for being a great audience. I'm going to hang around in this session to hear my other colleagues talk. And if there are questions that are for me, I'll wait to the end or at some point to be able to listen to those and answer them. I always want to say, keep a story in your heart. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to my colleagues, and thank you again for all your time.
Thank you so much, Will. That was incredibly interactive. That was That was great. The technical wizardry, I think,
Thank
is
you.
probably the proper terminology to use there. It doesn't look like we have any questions in at this point, but if questions do come up for Will, I'll make sure to get those for him. And I think we can move forward into the author roundtable.
Welcome to the 2020 Buckeye Book Fair. Thank you for joining us for this series of virtual events with Ohio authors and illustrators. The Buckeye Book Fair provides an annual celebration of literacy through author visits, educational programs for K through 12 students, and events for people of all ages. All of the books featured today and throughout the entire Buckeye Book Fair are available for purchase at buckeyebookfair.org. Should you have any questions for the presenters, please click on the Q&A button and type them in the window that appears, and they'll be answered later in the session. Michael J. Armstrong previously served as the Executive Director of the ALS Association, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, and other non-profit organizations. He's an active member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and his first book, entitled Best Day Ever, tells the story of William, on the last day of his summer vacation, who wants to have the best day ever, but is constantly interrupted by his neighbour, Anna. Jeffrey Ebbeler has illustrated nearly 40 picture books, and he has also designed pop-up books, painted large-scale murals, and sculpted and performed for a marionette theatre. His latest book, the one and only Dylan Sinclair, tells the story of Dylan, who auditions for the school play with dreams of being the star, but is crushed when he ends up being cast as a squirrel. Dave Szalay is an award-winning designer, writer, and professor who teaches illustration, visual storytelling, and design. And if you're thinking of taking a monster on a road trip this summer, his new book, Travel Guide for Monsters, is full of essential tips to help you enjoy the sights from coast to coast and avoid monster-related mishaps. Lindsay Ward was born and raised in sunny California, but now lives with her family in Peninsula, Ohio. Her book, Rosie Stronger Than Steel, is the story of Rosie the tractor, built by women in the US and sent to England to dig and plough alongside female farmers during World War II in support of the war effort.
All right. So we will go ahead and start in order. So I've got Michael up first. How are you doing, Michael?
Very good, Andrew. How are you today?
I'm doing
Hi,
well.
everybody. It's good to be here. I apologize for my sterile background. I'm at work. I work at a hospital, so sterile is very important these days.
Right, absolutely.
I hope nobody walks by and sees me without my mask. I'll be in trouble.
Well, do you want to quickly give us just a quick overview, and then we can
Sure.
jump in?
Yeah. So, this is a session for educators. Really my picture book is about, the primary story is about imaginative play and the importance of imaginative play, but the subtext of it really is about listening to people who are very different than us and realizing that sometimes the solutions to our problems can come from other people who are very different from us. So it's about being open-minded. At the end of the day, really what I'm looking for is to write a funny story that kids will enjoy and will push them to the next book. I've been in the nonprofit world for 20 plus years, and my philosophy has really boiled down to all the progress in the world starts with education, and education starts with reading. And so really all I want to do is write a book that kids like to read and will encourage them to pick up the next one. So that's my biggest hope. That said, I do have a teacher's guide for this book as well that's available on my website. You know what, I'll just put that in chat, my website, but I'll just do a quick screen share here and show show you that, and then I'll let you get to your questions. So it's a Common Core compliant teacher's guide for teachers that want to use it. Language arts, math, science, social studies. So again, that's available free on my website as PDF. Teachers can load it whenever they want. And I'm also available for Zoom calls if anybody would ever want to do that. I think we all have maybe a little bit of Zoom fatigue these days, but it's the best we can do right now.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, and I think that's great that you've, provided that resource for teachers to utilize your book in their classroom. When you were creating the book, how did you envision the book potentially being used in classrooms, or was that kind of like you wrote it and then okay, like how can we implement this in classrooms rather than the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said earlier, that wasn't part of the equation for me. I just wanted to write a book. I mean, I had this seed of an idea, and I wanted to write a book that kids would like based on that idea. And I knew it was an important topic that could be teachable, but I didn't write it with that in mind. And I'm not a good enough writer to have too many things in my mind at that point. So I worked with an educator. She's been teaching for 20 years, Michelle Person. She's a principal of an elementary school. And I offloaded that to her, and I was fortunate, enough to have that relationship to be able to do that. So she did all the heavy lifting there.
That's great. That's cool though. So from your experience, what are some important and meaningful conversations that teachers can foster with their students in teaching this book or teaching with this book?
Yeah, I think problem solving, certainly. This book is about a boy who wants to have the best day ever, the most fun ever, but he's so focused on his problem that he can't see the answers that are right in front of him. And stepping back from your problems. I never did a whole lot of coding, computer coding in my life, but the little bit I did, people always said, when you're stuck, you need to step away from that. Go get a sandwich. You just, at some point, you're just staring at your problem and you're not really seeing solutions. So, I think talking about problem solving is certainly lent itself to this book. And then again, just the very idea of not shutting out people who are different from you and that, maybe have very different ideas and very different approaches to things. We can all learn something from each other. And I think that, those are two topics, or maybe the second one is something we need to talk about a lot these days.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you said that you are willing to do like virtual visits and things like that. If teachers wanted to reach out to you, how would they do so?
Yeah, just reach out through my website. They can send me an email that way. And I'll, do my best. Even at work, I can carve out time to talk to classes. I'm happy to do it anytime. I haven't done a lot of it up to this point, but things are really just starting to get rolling. So, yeah, just send me an email and I'll connect with you and we'll schedule a time.
Okay, wonderful. And so your website, they can just click on that link that you shared in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And I should also note to all the viewers too that all of our authors and illustrators, their websites are linked inside of Buckeye Book Fair's website, as well as Tri-County's website too. So it is easy enough to find, but I wanted to make sure that our viewers knew that you were available and willing to have those types of events. So thank you very much, Michael.
Absolutely. And I didn't say that first, but I want to thank you guys for this venue and what a tremendous job of pulling this thing together in literally 6 months, having to reinvent this fair and this program. So I'm really impressed and appreciate everything you guys have done.
Thank you. And that's a testament to Julia, the kind of the brains behind the operation. So I'm just making sure it runs.
Hey, that's key these days.
Yep. Well, thanks again, Michael. We're going to move on now to Jeff Ebbeler. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing well. Jeff was actually on our young authors session earlier today. So Jeff and I have spent some time together already today.
It's true.
Jeff, I know you had mentioned that you wanted to do a little bit of a screen share to show a few things. So sure. I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, you can see behind me also that I'm sort of on set right now. It's sort of set up in my basement. I'm doing a sort of a web series of videos, story time, and sort of art activities that if you want to check out, Happen Inc. It's a local arts organization. Cincinnati is hosting it. So if you go to the Facebook page Happen Inc., you can check out those videos. And also I'm available to do Zoom school meetings and stuff like that at my website, jeffillustration.com. So I just thought I'd show real quick. Let me do the screen share thing. Okay. Is that going?
Yep.
Awesome. So I just thought I'd show real quick. I have 2 books out right now that came out this year. One is the one and only Dylan Sinclair, written by Cayman Edwards. He's an actor. He's been in sitcoms and TV movies. And the other book that I have out is called Feast of Peas. This is the second book I've done with Kashmira Sheth. I did a book with her a couple of years ago called Tiger in My Soup. And so this story was a fun challenge. It's an Indian folktale kind of story. It's set in India. It's set in a very specific time and place in India. So she even mentioned the city. So I had to do quite a lot of research for the characters, for the kind of clothes they wore and sort of the backgrounds. So I, found lots of pictures of the sort of clothes that they wear in that particular region of India. And also the architecture in that particular city, because I wanted it to look like we were really in that specific place. So Feast of Peas is all about this guy here, the tall guy, Jiva, has this great garden where he's growing all these peas and he's excited about all this food that he's growing for himself. And his neighbor, Ruvji, is always sneaking over and stealing the peas right before he's able to pick them. And so it's this whole back and forth sort of mystery as to who's stealing the peas. There's a great chase scene at the end where he finally discovers who it is, and they end up in the specific sort of town square in this town in India. And so I had to find lots of reference for that town, and also sort of take out all the modern buildings. So a little bit of it was imagining what that place looks like, but also sort of adding some of the architecture that's really there. Here is the chase scene. It's a very sort of Scooby-Doo kind of thing, where Ruvji dresses up as a ghost and sneaks into the garden at night to steal all the peas. And Jiva dresses as a scarecrow and chases him, and then they pull his mask off at the end. It's very Scooby-Doo-ish. The other book, the one and only Dylan Sinclair, was kind of like, was more of like, I didn't really have to do research like I did for the other book, because it felt like a lot of stuff that I was familiar with. This kid is very like creative. He loves art and theater and really being himself. And so I did a lot of theater when I was in high school. So I sort of thought about a lot of things back then. There's lots of like scenes where he's, practicing acting and dancing and making music. There's a great sort of scene at the end where he ends up being stuck in this part that he doesn't think is very good, but he sort of makes the best of it, where he's the space squirrel in this whole play about space. I wanted to show one more thing just because I'm working on it right now and I'm super excited about it. This is a book called Boo Stew. It's written by Donna Washington, and this story sort of takes place in a swamp. The main character, Curly Locks, sort of likes to go around and like make food out of all of this really gross ingredients that she finds in the swamp, and nobody in town likes to eat them. These are some of the character sketches, some of the townspeople. None of them have names, so like there's just the blacksmith and the chicken rancher. So I tried to like sort of make each character look like whatever they were being described as. The thing about this town is that there are all these like monsters that live in this town, and they end up really liking the food that she makes, whereas the people in the town don't like it. And I played around a whole lot because I was really excited to do this book about monsters, and I couldn't really figure out exactly how I wanted to approach it. And I found this thing online about making sort of Inkblot monsters, where you take you just sort of splatter some ink on a paper, and you use like a bottle of canned air, and you just kind of like blow the paint around, and you get all these great shapes. And it sort of felt like what I was going for, like these swamp creatures with these branches and stuff coming out of them. So I did a bunch of ideas for that. These are sort of the stages, from thumbnails to sketches to actually, I did all of the monsters on a separate piece of paper using the ink blots. And then I did, that's, since these characters are walking across water, I also did sort of a reflection into the water. And then I did a color painting separately, and then I put them all together in Photoshop. So that's sort of like a little bit of using traditional and digital stuff. I got one more thing to show if there's time. Is there time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Well, these are a couple of other pieces from the boost too. I wanted them to be kind of shadow creatures and not necessarily like physical monsters, so they're a little bit see-through. And I wanted to show one other thing, kind of like what Will was showing. This is a comic series that I'm working on right now. This will be out in the spring. It's called A Giant Mess. And it's all about this giant who comes to a town and uses the town sort of like his toy box, playing with all the airplanes and cars in town and stuff. And this is an early reader comic. I'm doing a whole series of them, so there'll be 2 other books after this. The one I'm working on next is called Cracking Me Up, about a kraken who's like very shy and uses humor to like make friends. So that's kind of a quick thing showing that. And I'm going to stop sharing now. So yeah, that's what I got going on.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I have one question for you, and then we can move on. Also, sure. if you have an opportunity, or if you can, if you could just type your website into the chat box, that way our viewers can get to your website, sure, if they want to explore a little bit more. But your Dylan St. Clair book, yes. Could you tell me a little bit about what like the underlying theme of the book is, in terms of for using it for teaching purposes?
It's really about expressing yourself and being comfortable with yourself. Dylan is very creative. He has all these things that he wants to do, and I think like he doesn't exactly get what he wants. He really wants this part in the play, and he's working so hard to get it. And it ends up he gets something that's totally unexpected, and he's really upset about it at first. But he ends up sort of seeing how he can make the best of it, and it turns out to be much better than the part that he thought that he was going to get. So it's sort of being a kid that's like expressive and being making the best of like situations when you don't like get exactly the way you want it.
Yeah, that's an important lesson for children to learn. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, Jeff. I appreciate it. So we're going to move on to Dave Szalay.
Hello.
How are you, Dave?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, could you expand upon a little bit how some of your works can be used in the classroom?
Yeah, I have 3 books featured at the fair this year. The one that was in the intro, Travel Guide for Monsters. This one's more of a fiction book, but it's based on actual landmarks across America. So there's a bit of a geography lesson for families taking their monster on trips when we can travel again. The other 2 books, though, that are nonfiction that I'd like to talk about, both of these have teacher's guides, and I will put them in the chat afterwards. This one, written by Artie Bennett, The True Story of Zippy Chippy, is a biography about a racehorse. one of the most losingest racehorses in history. Even he couldn't even win that title because there's a horse that actually lost 105 races and Zippy lost 100 races. This story is chock full of historical events related to Zippy's celebrated career as one of the most losing race horses in history. And I think both of my books, I'll talk about Lincoln first. The Superlative A Lincoln, which is written by Eileen Meyer. There's 18 poems about the superlative qualities of our 16th president, who was elected 160 years ago. He had a very celebrated career as a president, but he has a lot of very interesting personality traits, and there's such an interesting story to his life leading up to becoming the president. This book has great back matter. They both do, author's notes, but this one really has an incredible bibliography. It has resources for young Lincoln fans. It has a timeline of his life, and again, supported by teacher material on the author's website.
That's great. So it's definitely a history lesson in there. That's I always like that. That's my educational background is in history and social studies. So
yeah.
So you're speaking my language there. So that's great.
Great.
Do you do virtual visits?
I can do virtual visits. I'm, as you'd mentioned, well, earlier in the preview, I'm a professor, so I teach. I've been teaching for 16 years in college, and used to being around students. And these are actually, Lincoln is my debut book. So okay. I went from doing professional illustration, and I did lots of work with magazines in Kid Lit. And then I basically got my first 3 contracts in a row. So all these 3 books happened in sequence, and COVID hit right when the books were coming out. So I haven't had a chance to do live visits, but I'm available to do Zoom visits very easily.
Great. If you wouldn't mind putting your contact information into
Sure.
the chat, that
Yep.
way our viewers can look you up. That would be awesome. And obviously, I mean, I think it kind of goes, it's kind of evident in terms of the Abraham Lincoln book, but some of your other works, are there, what are the underlying themes that you hope students or kids will learn from your work?
Well, there is a common thread between all 3 books, and I think that it's probably that learning is fun. These are the type of books that I would have, and I'm a bit of a history and a science buff anyway, so these books really fit me pretty well as far as being the illustrator. But I was also adamant about digging into the research component. Both books were supported really well by the authors, and they had lots of reference material for me, but there were times when I dug in pretty deep, and I think that as I had fun learning about the subjects, I think it comes through in the stories. So I have a screen that I can show you that's a little bit a peek behind the scenes on putting together the Lincoln book, if you're interested.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting little tidbit, and it revolves around fact checking. And let's see if I got that up. Is that showing yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Oh, I got it. Hold on. I didn't click the right button. Now you've got.
We can see it now. Yep.
Okay. So as Jeff and Will talked about, we storyboard these books out like this in sketch form and work out composition, and there's a lot of fact checking going on in here. In fact, in this first spread, this is talking about Lincoln's, it's talking about Lincoln's he's the only president that holds a patent, and it's for a flatboat. So I had to, find interesting information about physically what that flatboat looks like, because in the book, it's pretty huge. Also, here's a fact about Lincoln. What we call the Lincoln bedroom was actually his office. And, all these kind of facts are strewn throughout the book visually, and they're not always necessarily in the text, but they're in the my visual representation. And then this is an interesting little tidbit too. This is sort of the progress of what I pitched for the cover ideas, and you can see how his cape became more and more, or his coat became more and more like a cape. Yeah. And we morphed into this sort of Superman stance to portray the heroic aspect of Lincoln, a figure bigger than life. And then another little detail about this spread is I finished the entire book, and just as we were getting ready to sign off and send this into production, somebody noted that his part was on the wrong side. His hair on every page, 48 pages, was going in the wrong direction. And the reason is because when I pulled up my reference material, I had the $5 bill, old and new, and I had this old daguerreotype to look at. And so I made his hair follow that. Well, apparently these are backwards. And so they had to go through and check to see, he has a little mole on his face, and they had to cross-reference to see which side of his face the mole was on and which side of his head the part was coming from. And he did change it at one point in his life, but what resulted for me was that at the 13th hour, I had to go in and redraw every face. Luckily, I'm a digital artist, and that's kind of a big part of my my background, but I was able to do that within it was rushed, but it was a pretty easy thing for me because I do work digitally. So this is the from the cover art, and it's slightly different from the actual finished piece.
Dave, that's why I have Neil deGrasse Tyson edit all my books.
I'll tell you what, I don't know what the lesson is there, because I will tell you that I was pulling up so much reference material and making sure, I even looked at what had been done to the White House since, and I had to find, period accurate depictions of the White House and of
it was
the furniture and everything.
Yep.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to share that with us.
Sure.
And again, if you have a chance to put your contact information in the chat, that would be awesome.
Will do.
And thank you for joining us today. And we're going to move on to Lindsay Ward. Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Well, so do you want to tell us a little bit about your book?
So I think I have 3 featured at the book fair this year that I had come out. So I'm going to show all 3, but mostly just talk about the 2 of them, because one of them is a board book and not really going to be used in classrooms, but unless it's preschool, I suppose. So the first book is called This Book is Gray. And although this is kind of a meta book where it's a book within a book, it does teach basic color theory. And so you can learn about what primary colors are, secondary colors, and the color relationships in this book. And so I really wanted to tell a story that was almost entirely in dialogue, which I was kind of proved to be a lot more difficult than I had anticipated. When you look at the art in Gray, you'll see there's quite a bit of word bubbles. And to counterbalance that, I did a lot of color coding the word bubbles so you knew who was talking. But the idea came from thinking that it would be really funny if complementary colors were actually complementing each other and saying oh, I like your hat and you look so nice today. And, and then they're actually complementary colors. And that's kind of where the idea came from. And then I thought it would be fun to tell a story about a color that's left out of the color wheel, like gray, who's technically an achromatic color. And I love color theory and I'm kind of a nerd for it. And so I just thought it would be a fun project. And since that came out, I actually, over the summer, self-published a coloring book that is a companion to it. And so you can actually, your kids can go through and learn about all the colors and their relationships and actually color them in. And there's color mixing pages that you can do with paint. And so I had a lot of fun working on this and was actually very surprised that the publisher would let me do an offshoot and self-publish it. But they were fully in support of it. And it was really fun to kind of come back to those characters again. Then the next book I had come out was in June, and this is a board book. It's called Let's Build. And it's a sequel to a book I did last year called Let's Go. And it's kind of a guessing game with wheels. We are big vehicle fans in our house. I have 3 boys, so everything is vehicles.
I believe that then,
all the time. And you'll notice most of my books have a vehicle theme now, which when I get to the next one, you'll see it again. So it goes through and it's rhyming and you get to guess what the vehicle is based off the treads. It has these die cut treads all the way throughout the book. And there's clues in the text and you guess and then, see what the vehicle is on the next page. So in Let's Go, the first one in the series, you're going around a city, and in this one, they're building a school. And so you're seeing all these different construction vehicles. I'm far more versed in construction vehicles than I ever thought I would be. Thank you to my boys and working on these books as well. And then the third book that I had come out is called Rosie, Stronger Than Steel. And this was definitely a curveball for me. I had never done anything that had any kind of, historical fiction element to it. But this is definitely a case of going to a county fair and getting sucked in the rabbit hole and just learning about history and getting really interested in it. I had gone to a county fair and I saw all of these tractors that were refurbished and, vintage models that were still working. And they were beautiful. And I've always been interested in old cars, but didn't really know there was a whole world of vintage tractors. And I had gone to that fair and then I started noticing all these women in my town. I live in a very small town, kind of halfway between Cleveland and Akron, in the middle of a national park. And I kept noticing all these women specifically women driving tractors and doing a lot of the lawn maintenance. And not only was it mostly women, which was kind of surprising to me, but it was also these, a significant proportion of them were vintage model tractors, which was unusual to me. I think, we think of these modern day huge John Deere tractors generally with, all these electronic components. And a lot of these tractors I was seeing were from like the war, essentially from World War II, because they were built so well to last. And so that I got interested in it and I discovered this whole history behind the fact that Ford, the company, had shipped 10,000 tractors overseas during World War II, and the British Women's Land Army had then used the tractors to facilitate the farms and basically feed the country while the country was at war. So it was this kind of across the Atlantic story of women working in the US and also in England to kind of, support the war effort. And so kind of along with what Dave was saying, there's quite a bit of research that went into it. And I had never really, up until this point, everything I was doing was fiction. So I had never really had to do that much research before for something like this. And I do have an extensive author's note in the back that kind of talks about the process I went through and some of the photographs of both what we know as the Rosie the Riveters, women that worked here in the United States in the factories, and then the British Women's Land Army. And although I knew about Rosie the Riveter, I didn't know anything about the land armies, and the US had one as well in different states. So it was just kind of, learning. I've always been a fan of World War II history, but I learned so much more about it And it was really fun to do a book through the vehicle's perspective. And that's actually what Rosie is about. Rosie's the tractor they build, and it's her journey overseas and kind of surviving in the war as well. So it's kind of an introductory to World War II in a very toned down way, because obviously there's a lot of thematics you don't want to get into with a picture book age necessarily. But yeah, so it was a really fun book to work on. And those are the 3 books that I have out this year.
So using that last book specifically, how do you envision like elementary teachers utilizing the book? I mean, aside from starting to kind of get into that teaching about kind of the basics of World War II, what do you envision a teacher doing with that book specifically? Like if you were to kind of in your mind's eye see a teacher teaching with it, what do you see?
I think that it's a great way to talk about World War II without going into the detail of some of the heavier thematics that you would probably learn more in late middle school and high school. I really but the book is primarily set in England. There's a brief period of time where she's in the US and then she gets shipped overseas. So it's a brief introduction to that, but I think it also mainly highlights women's roles in World War II and the work effort for that.
Yeah, for sure.
And how they contributed. When the book starts, it actually talks about how she's made. And it's a scrapping line. People are bringing toasters and refrigerators and all these different items that were ultimately melted down to then build the tractor. And one of the things that I found so interesting about it was that while the tractors, of course, were, they were metal and would have been gray initially, and these models would have been gray here in the United States, when they were shipped overseas, they were painted green to hide them in the fields from the bomber planes. So there were just all these details that were really interesting to me to kind of carry through. And I think not only showing the women's history as something to teach about, but also just like working together in a time of need, essentially, and how much people had to sacrifice during that time.
Yeah, for sure. I have one more question for you. It's actually from Michael. He's wondering what age range is your coloring book kind of geared towards? Because when I saw it, I thought, man, this would be really cool to kind of do a cross-curricular where you could get your art teacher involved in, with whatever theme you're covering in class as kind of a core teacher. But
yeah, I mean, it's funny because I don't think I would have done the coloring book had there not been like a pandemic and my son was sent home and we went to virtual learning. It actually encouraged me to make that and a couple other drawing books that I made that I self-published this summer, because my oldest is 5 and he loves to draw. And he was asking a lot of questions. He likes to ask me like, if you mix this and this, what do you get? And so he was getting really interested in color theory, and I wanted to have an interactive way for him to learn about color theory. And so it kind of happened organically, but when gray first came out, I saw it as a tool that art teachers could use to teach what a primary color is, what a secondary color is, what complementary color relationships are, in a way that's easy to understand, and understand the rules of color theory and how they kind of apply to the world around us. And although I didn't, when I write a story, I don't necessarily think like, oh, how is this going to be used in schools? It's more just like, what am I interested in, and what do I think kind of my boys will be interested in? I mean, I kind of use them as a sounding board now. And then it kind of took on this quality of being able to be integrated so easily in a classroom, because it does have this teaching element to it, but it is a funny way to approach it, as opposed to being inundated with color theory, which, is not the most interesting thing unless you're really interested in it. So that's kind of how I see it. So as far as the age range goes, I mean, I would say it's probably 4 and 5 and up, because it's just how detailed you want to get with it. I do have coloring pages throughout it. So like you know, it'll introduce, well, this is white. That's probably not the best example because the page is white. But you can see like Gray's page, you meet Gray, you can practice writing the letters for Gray, and then it shows you all these different objects that are Gray generally. And it does that for each color throughout the book. And I'm happy to say Gray has done well enough that I'm working on a sequel with pink, and I didn't expect that. I think people have really seemed to enjoy learning about the colors, and it was a fun project for me to work on. So
I think it's probably something that, you know, all students or all kids are taught, you know, your primary and secondary colors, but it seems no matter how many times we teach them, they usually end up making brown whenever they're mixing colors.
Right.
So.
Right, which actually you make brown almost every day. I mean, I get that. My son does it all the time.
Yeah. So.
I think it's important to kind of learn those rules. I think because they do apply to so much more than just like coloring in a coloring book. Like, you know, I think we are so affected by color all the time. Not only, you know, how it makes us feel and how we see things, but it's a big part of our life. And I don't know, it's been fun to be able to share that with kids.
Well, thank you for taking the time to share your books with us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want to thank all of our author illustrators for attending the session today, and everyone else who attended as a participant. If you have questions or you are looking to contact either myself or Buckeye Book Fair, our contact information is listed on this slide. And then also, if you are interested in earning professional development certificates, you can either use the QR code that's listed here on this screen, or you can type in, and I'm actually going to put this in the chat really quick, the link. Well, here we go. I'm going to put that in the chat really quick there, and then I'll share again. And again, thank you all for taking the time today. And I hope you have a great evening. And thank you for attending on behalf of Buckeye Book Fair and Tri-County ESC.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Here, guys.